My name is Rowan Eve Hale, 30 years old. The envelope looked like a wedding invitation that had lost its nerve. Creamstock, embossed county seal, all that formality covering a bruise. Commonwealth of Virginia, Portsmouth Family Court. Case A4271. Hale v. Hale. Petition for property division. Plaintiffs, Robert and Margaret Hale. Defendant, Rowan Hale. My parents had found a new way to talk to me. Knox, my old shepherd with the bad hip and the two wise eyes, nudged my knee like he was bracing me for weather. "It's okay," I lied, setting the paper on the kitchen table where sunlight turned dust into slow galaxies. "It's just words." It wasn't. It was abandonment, printed like a verdict, the same word my father spat the night I enlisted. "You're abandoning your family." I'd told him I was choosing service over smallness. He'd laughed like I'd picked a foreign language on a dare. 12 years is a long time to keep a laugh in your bones. I boiled coffee that tasted like a mechanic's sink and pulled the navy chest down from the closet shelf. Salt and oil ghosted out when I cracked the lid. Dress blues lay inside, dark as deep water, buttons bright as moon coins. Beneath them, the folded flag from Chief Lewis's funeral. I hadn't worn the uniform since the day we fired 3 slow shots into air that deserved better men. I hesitated, then lifted the jacket and felt old tendon memory tug my shoulders back into place. The wool was heavier than I remembered. So was the person I became when I put it on. My phone buzzed. Courthouse clerk, polite and exhausted. "Yes, ma'am. Your parents are petitioning to reclaim the family property on grounds of..." She read it like it tasted bad. "Abandonment. If you wish to contest, you'll need to appear, in person." "Copy," I said, because muscle memory will salute even on a landline. After I hung up, I drove out to the farmhouse I was supposedly abandoning. Maple Creek Road hunched under heat. The porch sagged the way old backs do before storms. Paint sloughed from clapboards in tired curls. Out front, the oak your knees could grow up on split itself, lightning white down one side. My grandfather had built this house when war spat him back out with calluses and a grin that could quiet a bar. He left it to me. Not to the son who wanted to sell it, not to the family that treated it like a bargaining chip, to the granddaughter who learned to plane a board by watching his hands. "Every board's got a story, Ro," he'd say, running a thumb along the grain. "Take care of the wood and it'll take care of you." On the back step, I found the old rail where he used to carve dates so faint a stranger would call them scratches. My fingers traced an initial. E for Everett Hale, his name. When I shifted the light, I saw another letter tucked in the shadow of the first. R. Mine. The kind of message men who don't say much leave behind, so someone who needs it can find it. That night, the house settled like a tired animal. Knox snored thunder by the couch. I opened a letter I hadn't read in years. My CO after discharge. "Commander Hale, you served with quiet distinction. Remember, honor doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes it's the courage to show up." I folded the words, the way you fold a map you'll need later. Morning came up sharp as a blade. I brushed the jacket, pinned the ribbons with hands that shook only when I looked at them, and told the mirror the truth. We're not wearing this for them. The courthouse sat smaller than it had when I was a kid, trailing my mother's perfume and my father's impatience. A janitor swept methodically, pausing when he clocked the chest. "Ma'am," he said softly, like he'd salute if someone told him it wouldn't be weird. Inside smelled like wax and old paper and last chances. Families murmured on benches. A toddler's shoe thunked a pew. Lawyers rustled documents with the drama of magicians. I sat on the back row and felt the kind of stillness that isn't fear. It's calculation. A room like this only wins if you show it your throat. "Hey, 4271. Hale versus Hale," the clerk called, and my knees, rebuilt and temperamental, remembered how to move. The rhythm settled at 8 counts, the way we learned when sand owns the ground beneath your feet. My father had aged into the exact shape of his stubbornness, Sunday suit strangling his neck, mechanic's hands scrubbed but not absolved. My mother wore pearls, the way some women wear shields. She whispered one word when she saw me, uniform. And for a second, I thought I heard awe under the disapproval. Habit is louder. I sat across from them at the empty defendant's table. I hadn't hired a lawyer. People say it's foolish. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes you carry your own case because letting someone else do it would feel like picking the wrong weapon. The judge entered with the gravity of a man who's seen too many people make the same mistakes. Age creased his face in maps. Harold L. Simmons, the nameplate said. He looked at my parents first, then his gaze hit the ribbons on my chest, and he stalled like a needle catching on vinyl. His hand trembled once as he reached for the file. Mr. and Mrs. Hale, he began, and the echo of his voice made the room feel older. You're claiming your daughter abandoned her rights and obligations to the property. Yes, Your Honor, my father said too quickly. We've paid the insurance, kept it up, covered the taxes. I set a folder down. My voice stayed level because it had been trained that way. I'll address that, sir. The judge glanced at me again, something like recognition rising behind his eyes, the way a memory comes back to your tongue when someone says the first line of a song. He cleared his throat to hide it. And you are? I stood. The hat brim touched wood with a sound that would have made my grandfather smile. Commander Rowan Hale, Your Honor. The word commander hit the room like a dropped wrench. My father's jaw stalled halfway to a protest. My mother's fingers tightened until the pearls stopped pretending. The judge's mouth parted. Not performative, not for the gallery. A whisper slipped out before he could catch it. My God, he said, almost to himself. Is that really her? Silence rang, the kind that makes the air feel new. I didn't look at my parents. I looked at the bench. I'd come to end a story that wasn't true, not with a fight, with a fact. Proceed, the judge said softly. But his eyes were already somewhere else, on a podium draped in flags 6 years ago, on a citation that had my name spelled right, on a day this state had felt proud without needing to know who my parents were. I opened the folder. The receipts made small, decisive sounds. The clerk swore me in. The oath sat warm on my tongue, simple and heavy, the way good promises are. I set the folder on the table and slid the top sheet forward like a card I'd been holding for too long. Your Honor, I said, for 12 years I've paid every tax bill on 47 acres of Maple Creek Road. Here are the county receipts, confirmation numbers, and bank statements, first from active duty pay, then from my disability pension, line by line. The judge adjusted his glasses. Paper made a sound like dry leaves as he turned pages. Across the aisle, my father shifted, the leather of his belt creaking in the quiet. Dad's lawyer, a man with a shine to his tie and to his scalp, stood with rehearsed gravity. Your Honor, whether Commander Hale has pieced together payments is immaterial to the question of abandonment. The property has been neglected. My clients have borne the burden of maintenance, insurance, and... Respectfully, I said, no. I slid a second stack forward. Homeowners policy emails, renewal confirmations, and the autopay authorization from 2013. The policy is in my name. When the roof leaked in 18, I paid for patching. Here are the photos before and after. When the well pump failed in 21, I paid for the replacement. Here's the receipt, service date, and the serial number on the installed unit. The lawyer's practiced smile thinned. And repairs, Commander, were you present? Or is this a story told by PDFs? I was present for the roof, I said. For the well, no. I was recovering from surgery. I signed the work order from my kitchen table with a machine on my leg that hummed louder than a lawnmower. I kept my voice even. When you can't climb a ladder, you hire someone who can. That's called responsibility, not abandonment. The judge's mouth twitched. Maybe a almost smile, maybe a tick earned from decades of hearing people forget the difference. Dad leaned forward, cheeks flaring high color. We kept that place from falling apart. I mowed. I trimmed trees. I fixed those steps with my own hands. You mowed twice last year, I said, not unkindly. Thank you. I slid a third sheet to the bailiff. The contractor's log shows the rest. I'm not disputing your labor, Dad. I'm disputing the claim that I disappeared. Mom's pearls clicked softly when she turned. You disappeared from us, she whispered, like a truth she could at least own. From this family. I looked at her, then at the judge. They're not wrong about that. We are estranged. The word felt clinical and safer than the story under it. But this proceeding is about the property, not affection. The lawyer recovered, smoothing his tie. Abandonment isn't only about money, Your Honor. It's about intent. She left home and never came back. I exhaled. I left for the Navy when I was 18. I came back between deployments when I could. I came back with a rebuilt knee and a pension and nightmares that don't check a calendar. And every time I returned, I paid the taxes that kept the state from taking the only thing my grandfather meant for me. Intent is documented here. I tapped the will. Everett Hale, USN, left the property to me in trust, with a note about stewardship. He didn't say sell it, he said take care of it. The judge's pen paused over the will like it was listening. He lifted his head and really looked at me, not just at the uniform. Commander, he said, voice careful, for the record, and I apologize for asking in this forum, are you the same Rowan Hale recognized by the Secretary of Defense in 2019, the civilian military evacuation in Yemen? The air in the room changed temperature. I could feel it against the back of my neck, the way heat eddies when a door opens on a summer porch. Yes, sir, I said, no flourish. Logistics lead, 43 evacuees, 1 helicopter down in floodwater, 1 improvised boat from pallets and a prayer. We kept everyone alive until the second bird could land. That was a team, not me. Dad blinked like the word helicopter belonged to movies, not to his daughter's mouth. Mom's fingers ceased their pearl rosary and settled flat on the table. The lawyer cleared his throat, reaching for the thread he'd lost. Admirable service aside, Your Honor, my clients have carried costs. Light bills, brush clearing, liability. Show me, the judge said, without looking at him. Invoices, canceled checks, dates. The lawyer's folder rustled a lot and said almost nothing. He produced 3 receipts, a hardware store purchase for a chainsaw, a mower repair, a single insurance inquiry that had never been paid. The judge stacked them politely beside my pile, where they looked like a few coins next to a ledger. Dad's voice found its footing in anger. We did it because she wasn't here, because she chose strangers over her own blood. That house was supposed to be for family. She ran off to play soldier. The old hurt wanted to answer. The trained part of me decided against it. I chose service, I said. And I've kept the one promise that was mine to keep. I didn't let the state take Granddad's house for unpaid taxes. Cost me late nights and early mornings and more money than I had. I didn't do that to spite you. I did it because a man who taught me to set a level would have called it cowardice if I didn't. Silence laid a hand over the room. Somewhere in the back, a bailiff's radio crackled and then thought better of itself. Judge Simmons stacked the papers, aligning corners with care, the way men do when they're giving themselves time to feel. The gallery leaned forward a fraction. Curiosity, not judgment. I could smell floor wax and somebody's too strong cologne and the memory of rain from the coats slung over pews. We've heard enough for today, the judge said finally. I'll review and issue a written decision. He glanced at my parents, then back at me. Something in his eyes softened, not pity, regard. Court is in recess. His gavel found the block with a restrained tap. The sound still carried like a message into another room. Dad stood so fast his chair snarled the floor. So that's it? She waltzes in with... He flicked a hand at my chest like the ribbons were a trick of light. And we're the villains? Robert, Mom warned, but it came out a plea. I put my hat on the table. It made that small, final sound again. This isn't a battle, I said quietly. It's a record. Outside the courtroom doors, the hallway breathed people in and out. A veteran in a cap touched its brim as I passed. A little girl stared and then, emboldened, whispered thank you like a dare. I nodded because there are languages you don't unlearn. On the courthouse steps, the August heat came down hard. My knee hummed its weather report. I waited in the shade for the world to stop ringing, for the words Yemen evacuation to stop echoing in my parents' skulls like an address they hadn't known I'd ever lived at. Behind me, through the glass, I could see the judge still at the bench, head bowed, over the will. Not a man looking for a loophole, a man remembering a ceremony where a name had been read out loud and meant something. He'd said he'd take it under advisement. His eyes had already written the ending. The written ruling came 2 mornings later. A plain envelope slid into my mailbox, like a verdict disguised as junk mail. Inside, 1 paragraph ended a decade-long argument. This court finds no evidence that Commander Rowan Hale abandoned her property or failed her obligations. Documentation shows continuous maintenance and payment. Petition denied. 12 words to close 12 years. I sat at my kitchen table, the paper trembling in my hand, though my body was still. Knox snored at my feet, his breath soft and steady. For a long time, I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't even smile. Winning, it turned out, felt less like triumph and more like the silence after a detonation. Everything still standing, but rearranged. When I finally folded the ruling and slipped it back into the envelope, I didn't put it away. I left it on the table beside my grandfather's compass, its needle quivering toward north like it was trying to say, "Now what?" I didn't have an answer. By late afternoon, I found myself driving without meaning to, south, toward the old harbor where my first deployment had begun. The wind tasted like rust and salt. The docks creaked the same as they always had, even if the faces had changed. A man in a weathered cap nodded as I passed. "You served?" he asked. "Still do," I said, then caught myself. "Did." He grinned. "You never stop. You just trade uniforms." He was right. I sat on the pier until the sky turned copper. The water lapped at the pylons, patient, endless. Somewhere out there were the men I couldn't bring home. Lewis, Ortiz, Harper, the ones who'd nicknamed me Iron Eve because I wouldn't let them quit. I could still hear their laughter carried on wind that smelled of oil and cordite. "Miss you boys," I whispered. "We made it back, just not all the way." When the tide changed, I drove to the farmhouse. The gravel road curved through cornfields gone high and wild. The place looked even older now, the porch half collapsed, windows clouded with years of storms. I parked by the gate, grabbed my flashlight, and climbed the steps. The boards moaned but held. Inside, the air was cool and dusty, scented faintly with cedar and decay. My flashlight beam caught the old mantel where Granddad used to rest his Navy cap. It was still there, brittle with dust, but solid. Beside it, a framed photograph of him in uniform, jaw square, grin confident, the world still simple. I ran my fingers along the carving under the railing again. The initials were clearer in the light. EH for Everett Hale, RH for me. But there was something else below it this time. Faint words, almost invisible until I brushed away the dust. Strength without anger. It stopped me cold. I remembered him saying that once, during one of our long summer afternoons fixing fences. "Strength isn't loud, Ro," he'd said. "It's patient. You keep hitting nails with rage and you'll split the wood. Hit them with focus and the whole thing holds." I hadn't thought of that in years. But now, reading those words carved into the wood, I realized he'd left them for me. Maybe knowing someday I'd need to see them again. I sat on the porch for hours. The sun bled out, the crickets tuned their chorus, and somewhere an owl called once, low and steady. I felt the ache in my knee, the stiffness in my shoulders, the quiet in my chest where anger had finally burned itself out. Then headlights appeared at the end of the drive. For a moment, I thought Dad had come to gloat or argue, but when the car stopped and the door opened, it was Mom. She climbed out carefully, still wearing pearls, her blouse too formal for dirt roads. In her hand, she held a small photo frame. "I found this in your grandfather's drawer," she said softly, walking toward me. It was a faded black and white photo of him in uniform, kneeling with a little girl perched on his knee. Me, maybe 4 years old, clutching his cap like a crown. "He always said you had his eyes," she murmured. I nodded. He was the only one who ever saw me straight. Mom swallowed, looking out over the dark fields. "He was proud of you," she said, "even when the rest of us didn't understand." "Why didn't you?" I asked quietly. She stared at her shoes, rain-darkened gravel, reflecting the porch light. "Your father thought the military would change you, make you hard, make you unreachable. And maybe he was right. You came back different." "It made me hard enough to survive," I said, "and strong enough to forgive." Her eyes flicked up, startled. "Forgive?" I shrugged, for not knowing what to do with a daughter like me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the wind threading through the dry corn stalks. Then she reached out and brushed a speck of dust off my sleeve. The smallest, most ordinary gesture, but her hand lingered there, trembling. "Dinner's at 6 on Sunday," she whispered. "Your father might even come home on time." It was the closest thing to an olive branch she'd ever offered. "I'll think about it," I said. When she drove away, her taillights glowed red until they disappeared over the hill. I sat on the porch with the photo in my lap, the carved words under my hand, and the quiet settling back around me like a promise. I wasn't sure if I'd go Sunday, but for the first time I wanted to want to. Sunday came sooner than I was ready for. The morning rain fell in thin gray threads that softened the world, turning the air metallic and clean. Knox followed me around the house as I gathered the courage to leave, his nails ticking across the floorboards, tail thumping once each time I slowed. Should I go? I asked him. He sighed, which was as close to an answer as I'd ever get. I looked at the uniform hanging over the chair. Not the full blues this time, just my service khakis. Simple, unadorned, but honest. I didn't need medals to talk to my parents. I just needed to be myself, without armor. The drive to their house was quiet except for the hum of tires and a country radio station whispering old songs about forgiveness. The fields had turned the color of late autumn wheat, amber, brittle, beautiful. When I pulled into their gravel driveway, it felt like stepping back into a life I'd already outgrown. The barn still leaned slightly to one side. The oak tree where I used to climb was almost bare. A single rusted swing hung crooked from the porch. Mom opened the door before I even knocked. "You came," she said, breathless, like she'd been rehearsing surprise. "Dinner's at 6, I replied, glancing at my watch. Didn't want to be late. Her smile wavered, but stayed. "He's out back," she said. "Go on." The smell of roast chicken and baked corn drifted through the kitchen, so familiar it nearly cracked me open. For a heartbeat, I was 16 again, sneaking bites from the counter before Dad walked in to tell me to act like a lady. I stepped onto the back porch. Dad was sitting on the steps, oiling an old Winchester rifle. It wasn't loaded. He treated it like a relic more than a weapon. The sound of the cleaning cloth sliding over the metal filled the space between us. He didn't look up. "Thought you wouldn't show." "I almost didn't," I said. He nodded once, still polishing. "Your mother said you might." We sat in silence for a while, rain tapping lightly on the tin roof. The smell of wet earth drifted up from the yard. Finally he said, "You kept the house." "I did." "Gonna live there?" "Maybe. Gonna fix it first." He grunted, a sound halfway between approval and disbelief. "Your granddad built it right. Just needs care." "I know." He stopped working, laid the rifle across his knees, and finally looked at me. His eyes weren't angry anymore, just tired. "He'd be glad you're taking care of it." "I think so too." He leaned back on his elbows, studying the rain. "You think I was wrong?" "Yes," I said, then softer. "But I think you were scared more than wrong." His jaw twitched. "Scared of what?" "Losing control, losing me. You wanted a daughter who stayed close. You got one who went far." He huffed out a breath that might have been a laugh. "You nearly got yourself killed out there." "I know," I said, "but I also save people." The cloth in his hand stilled. He set it down. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt fragile, like glass holding weight. Then he said quietly, "When that judge said your name, Commander Hale, I didn't even recognize it. Didn't recognize you." I nodded. "I barely recognized you either." That earned a dry chuckle. "Fair." We went inside. Mom had set the table the way she always used to. Mashed potatoes on the left, gravy in the blue bowl that had been chipped since I was 12. The smell of food, warm and ordinary, filled the space where conversations had once gone to die. "Sit," she said gently. "Both of you." We did. Dinner was awkward, hesitant, but real. They asked questions, not about medals or combat, but about life, my job, my knee, whether Knox still barked at thunderstorms. Mom smiled when I mentioned him. "You always did take in the broken ones." "I guess I became one," I said. Dad looked down at his plate. "You're not broken," he muttered. "You're just different now." "Maybe," I said, "but I'm still yours." He swallowed hard, eyes bright. "Didn't think I'd hear you say that again." After dinner, we stood on the porch. The rain had stopped. The world smelled like pine and earth. Somewhere, lightning flickered behind distant clouds. "You remember that night before you left for boot camp?" Dad said suddenly. "I told you not to go." I remember. I was wrong. The words were quiet, but they hit harder than any apology could have. He reached into his pocket and handed me something small and worn. "He left this for me," he said, "but I think it belongs to you now." It was Grandpa's pocket compass, the same one he used to carry when we fished at the creek. The brass was tarnished, the hinge stiff. I opened it carefully. The needle still moved, steady as breath. Inside the lid, faintly etched in my grandfather's handwriting, were the words, "Honor is the only direction that never changes." My throat tightened. "Thank you." Dad nodded once. He'd be proud. He put a hand on my shoulder, awkward, heavy, real, and said nothing more. When I left, the porch light stayed on behind me. Halfway down the drive, I looked back through the rearview mirror. Mom stood in the doorway, Dad beside her. They didn't wave. They didn't have to. For the first time in my life, I didn't need them to. At home, I placed the compass on my nightstand beside my folded uniform. The lamp caught the brass just right, throwing a small, golden reflection onto the wall. Knox curled at my feet, sighing into sleep. Outside, thunder rolled far off in the hills, but inside the house it was quiet, the kind of quiet you earn. I looked at the compass again and whispered, "North," as if the word alone could anchor me. It did. Autumn settled in slow that year, the kind of season that makes the world exhale. The trees along Maple Creek burned orange and gold, and every gust sent leaves skittering across the old porch like applause for work half finished. I spent my days restoring the farmhouse, not because I needed to prove anything anymore, but because fixing things felt like breathing again. Each nail I drove was a small prayer to steadiness. Each board I sanded was an apology whispered to the past. The swing was the first to come back. I found the old chain tangled in the shed, oiled it, and hung a new plank. When I sat down, it creaked but held. Knox lay in the grass beside me, watching with the patient loyalty only old dogs know. "Almost home, huh, buddy?" I murmured. He wagged his tail once, slow and sure. Late one afternoon, a familiar rumble broke the quiet. Dad's truck pulled up the drive. He didn't get out right away, just sat there, engine idling, hands on the wheel. Finally, he killed the ignition and stepped out, the gravel crunching under his boots. "You fixed the swing," he said. "Yeah, Grandpa would have hated seeing it busted." He nodded, scanning the yard, the barn, the new coat of paint on the porch rails. "You've been busy." "Helps to keep moving." He rubbed the back of his neck, uncomfortable with stillness. "Looks good. You did good." It was only 3 words, but from him, they were everything. He turned to leave, then paused. "See you Sunday?" "Maybe," I said. He grunted, half smile tugging his mouth. "Don't be late." Then he climbed back into the truck and drove off, leaving a trail of dust and something lighter than pride. That Sunday, they came as promised. Mom, Dad, and even Ryan, my older brother, with his wife and a casserole dish clutched like a peace offering. Ryan looked older too, softer around the edges. "Didn't think you'd remember how to cook," I teased when I saw the dish. "Didn't think you'd remember how to stay," he shot back, but his grin took the sting out. We ate on the porch. Nothing fancy. Fried chicken, green beans, laughter that came hesitantly at first, then easier as the evening stretched on. It was strange and beautiful, like hearing a song you'd loved once but forgotten the words to. At one point, Dad lifted his glass of sweet tea. "To the Hales," he said, "and to the one who finally made us proud." Mom's eyes went wet. Ryan clinked his glass to mine. I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded. Later, as the sky bruised purple, Dad lingered while the others packed up. He leaned against the porch post, staring at the fields. "You remember what your grandfather used to say?" he asked. "That strength without anger line you found carved on the railing?" I smiled. "Yeah, been thinking about it a lot." "Me too," he said. "Took me 60 years to understand it." He reached into his pocket and handed me something small. The compass again, its brass warm from his hand. "You keep this. I think it's pointing where it belongs now." When I opened it, I noticed something new. Beneath the old engraving, "Honor is the only direction that never changes," another line had been etched, fresh and careful. "Strength without anger." I met his eyes. "You did this?" He shrugged. "Your mom thought you should have it, but I figured the words ought to travel with it." My throat tightened. "Thank you." He nodded once, the gesture rough and shy. "You know," he said, almost to himself, "your grandfather would have liked tonight. He'd say we finally finished what we started." I laughed softly. "Guess we did." After they left, I stayed out on the porch, the compass open on my knee, the swing swaying gently in the evening wind. Fireflies blinked in the field like scattered stars. The farmhouse didn't look like a relic anymore. It looked alive. When the crickets quieted and the night deepened, I thought about the girl I'd been when the summons first arrived, the one who thought strength meant walking into court armed with proof and pride. She'd needed to learn that real strength is quieter, rebuilding without resentment, forgiving without surrendering. I closed the compass and slipped it into my pocket, the metal cool against my palm. For the first time, I knew exactly where north was, and that I didn't need it to find my way home. Winter came early to Maple Creek that year. Frost rimmed the fence posts by dawn, and the fields glittered like they'd been dusted with glass. The air smelled of wood smoke and the promise of another beginning. By then, the farmhouse was almost finished. Fresh white paint, mended porch, new shingles, everything my grandfather built was sturdy again. And somehow, so was I. The town had asked me to speak at the local high school for Veterans Week. I tried to say no at first. Talking about myself still felt strange. But Vanessa, my friend from the service who'd moved nearby, said, "You've already told the hard story in court. The rest is just truth." So I said yes. When I stepped onto the stage that Friday morning, the gym was packed. Students fidgeting, teachers whispering, the flag behind me catching the light. The principal introduced me as Commander Rowan Hale, Navy veteran and hometown native. The title sounded foreign in a place that once called me the runaway daughter. I started simply. "I used to think honor was about medals," I said, voice steady through the microphone's echo. "Now I know it's about choices, the small ones, doing what's right when nobody's watching, showing up when it would be easier to disappear." I told them about my grandfather, about the farmhouse, about how forgiveness takes the same kind of patience as sanding old wood. It's slow, uneven, but it smooths the splinters if you keep at it. I didn't mention the lawsuit or the years of silence. They didn't need that. What they needed to hear was that strength isn't anger. It's persistence wrapped in grace. When I finished, the students stood, not because protocol told them to, but because maybe, for a moment, they understood what quiet courage looked like. Afterward, a boy about 16 approached me. "My brother's deployed," he said. "He doesn't talk much when he calls home. Sometimes my dad says he's changed, but I think he's just tired." I smiled. "Tell your dad change isn't always bad. It means your brother saw something worth carrying. He'll come back different, not lost." The boy nodded, eyes bright, and I realized something that surprised me. Helping others find peace was the only kind of command I still wanted. That evening, I drove back to the farmhouse. The sunset spilled copper light across the fields, the sky wide and forgiving. Inside, Knox lifted his head from the rug and wagged once before settling back to sleep. I set my uniform, now pressed and clean, back in the cedar chest where it belonged. Not as a symbol of war, but of everything it took to find home. Outside, headlights swept across the gravel drive. I stepped onto the porch, heart tightening before relaxing when I saw the familiar truck. Dad climbed out, followed by Mom with her ever-present pearls. They didn't knock. They didn't need to. Mom carried a pie. "You didn't think we'd miss dinner again, did you?" I laughed. "Guess not." Ryan showed up a few minutes later, his wife balancing a casserole dish in one hand and their toddler in the other. The little girl reached for me, all curls and curiosity. "Auntie Ro!" she squealed. The word hit me like sunlight. We ate outside, bundled in coats, the porch light casting a halo over the table. Laughter filled the air, hesitant at first, then full. Dad raised his glass. "To the Hales," he said, then added with a grin, "and to the one who reminded us what that name means." I met his eyes and lifted mine, "To finishing what we start." Mom wiped at her eyes discreetly. Ryan leaned back, arm around his wife, and for the first time in years, we looked like a family. Not perfect, not mended, but whole enough. After everyone left, I stayed on the porch. The night was sharp and still, the stars bright as frost. I pulled Grandpa's compass from my pocket. Its needle pointed steady north, same as always. Under the lid, the two engravings caught the moonlight. "Honor is the only direction that never changes. Strength without anger." I'd added one more line below them, just yesterday. "Forgiveness is the truest form of discipline." I smiled, tracing the words with my thumb. "Guess we're both home now, Grandpa," I whispered. Knox lumbered out and rested his head on my knee. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. Somewhere in the dark, the old oak creaked, a familiar, comforting sound. For a long moment, I just breathed. No medals, no courtroom, no ghosts, just the quiet rhythm of a life that finally fit the shape of my heart. I looked toward the horizon, where my parents' farmhouse light glowed faintly through the trees, a small, steady beacon. Some wounds don't close with apologies. They close with persistence, with time, with showing up again and again until the light stays on. So I sat there, letting the night settle around me, the compass cool in my palm, the world at last still. "Home," I said softly, "for good this time." And the wind, patient as forgiveness itself, carried the word away.